Hi, I'm Laura Mccullough, and this is Brookdale's Visiting Writers Series. Today I am talking to Tony Hoagland, one of the country's preeminent poets. He recently won the Jackson Award, which he was chosen for by three masters in contemporary poetry, Philip Levine, Robert Pinsky, and Ellen Bryant Voigt, a much-deserved award. He has three full collections of poetry. His first was Sweet Ruin, which won the Brittingham Prize in Poetry, two from Grey Wolf Press, What Narcissism Means to Me, and Donkey Gospel, which won the James Laughlin Award of the Academy of American Poets. And he has a number of chapbooks, including the most recent one, Hard Rain, published by Holly Ridge Press. In addition, Tony Hoagland has published through Grey Wolf in 2006 a collection of essays on poetry called Real Sophistication. He currently teaches in the poetry program at the University of Houston, and he's also on the faculty of the Warren Wilson Low Residency MFA program. He's won many prizes, a Guggenheim, an O.B. Hardison Jr. Prize, the Mark Twain Award. He is, as I said, one of the country's preeminent poets. He's deeply funny. He's scathingly poignant. He has a searing accuracy in his poems, and I am very glad to have him with us today. Hi, Tony Hoagland.
Hi, Laura. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you for coming. Now, Tony, I'd like to ask you a question first for the audience who may not necessarily know you or your work. When I said all of those little things about you, one of the things I was speaking about was the relationship between the comic and the poignant. Could you talk a little bit about that, about tone, about diction, how this comes to play in your work?
Sure, I'd be glad to. When I started writing poems, and when I was at the University of Iowa as an undergraduate, the University of Iowa even then was a very famous center for creative writing and for poetry. And one of the distressing things about it, though, was that the poetry was all morbid and serious and what seemed to me to be self-important and, somewhat cryptic. And so I thought I must be missing something. It seemed that I was among a lot of people who had been diagnosed with leukemia because they were writing about, they were writing poems about their own funerals, they were writing poems about looking at the trees, and seeing death, and they all dressed entirely in black. This was before antidepressants, you have to understand that. And it was during a time of poetry where image was very important, but also this kind of noir quality was important.
Well, Wallace Stevens' death is the mother of beauty.
Yeah, I know, but Wallace Stevens, he also knew how to, he also knew how to have a good time in his poems. So some of my values, my poetic values, were formed in reaction to the work of my teachers there and to some extent the graduate students there. I was just an undergraduate. And that's where I think I began trying to be comic, and it's also where I developed an appetite for absolute clarity in poems. No mysterioso, cryptic, philosophical vapors and fogs. I wanted things to be very clear.
You didn't want your reader held on the other side of all of that.
Yes, and I didn't like the self-importance and pretentiousness of pretending that I was attuned to some kind of special realm of information. So that's when I started trying to be funny and to be wisecracking, and to be qualifying whatever it is I might have had that was mildly serious to say. If you're going to say, I hurt, you should be able to, pop a balloon or make a giraffe out of long, skinny balloons. So in my work, I think, and in the work of many poets that I like, clowning and self-implication and sort of an acknowledgement that we're all fools seemed like a good idea in terms of constructing voice. And I'll give you a few examples of jokey poems that I was attached to early. The other thing, for example, there's a poem by James Tate that I was thinking of earlier. It starts off, he's addressing it to a friend of his, and he says, "I thought I knew something about loneliness, but you go to the stockyard, buy a pig's ear, bring it home, sew it to your couch. That, you say, is my best friend." So, you know, that...
And so you found permissions there.
I found permission there,
You weren't totally
yeah.
alone in this sea of other, you know, black T-shirt wearing, deeply
Yeah,
feeling
I mean,
people.
I kept the color combination. You know, the dress code appealed to me. It imprinted me, you know, in ways that I was powerless to resist. But yeah, so I was attracted to comic poets. Now that made my poetry really probably a little too jokey for a long time too. So.
Well, your first book, you know, has moments of pith and wit, but Sweet Ruin's got a lot of duende. I mean, there's some...
Yeah, I know, but that wasn't exactly my early work either.
Okay,
so.
okay. Well, let me ask you a question about the early work. Before even you arrived at the Iowa workshop, which is, you know, an incredible achievement in itself. Many people would like to be...
I was just an undergraduate there.
Yes, still you were there.
I hitchhiked. It was easy.
How did you decide, I want to be a writer? What was it like to be a young man in a world where, you know, most high schools are revering the guys who are wrestling and playing football and beating the crap out of each other and getting success over their physicality?
This is an autobiographical question?
Yeah. How, you know, and I heard we talked earlier about listening on the radio to Donald Hall and Billy Collins, and they were talking about, you know, arriving at a sensibility about verbalness at certain ages. When did that happen for you?
Well, I don't think that I ever said I'm going to be a poet. I don't think I would have dreamed of that. Not that I didn't write poems and read poems, but I just liked poetry a lot. That's how I ended up here. But I went to school. I went to junior high school and high school in southern Louisiana during the 60s, the late 60s. And it was a pretty brutal culture. It was also during the late 60s. So Vietnam was on in the background. There was a lot of drugs. There was a lot of rock and roll, and there was a lot of fighting and stuff like that. And I was quite out of place. So I think I started using my mouth as a social ploy. You know, I developed sarcasm. I can't really exactly remember the exact moment, but I definitely developed sarcasm and wit as a way of having a social presence. So that was important. And then,
Dickhead,
you know, like
the poem Dickhead.
Yeah, for example.
That, yeah.
But not that Dickhead is an example of great wit, you know. But
you know, the last line of that is I made a word my friend.
Yeah, that's right. And so it does speak to language as an ally, no doubt about that. But I think that most young men, you know, we culturally know about young women and how they suffer various kinds of lobotomy and peer pressure and anorexia and pretending to be dumb. You know, young men suffer an immense number of cultural forces and interpersonal kinds of brutalizings that are less acknowledged. And so I think I experienced all of those in extreme ways. And
What woke you up? How did you become metacognitively aware of that?
I'm sure that it wasn't in high school, you know.
Were you writing poems in high school?
Yeah, I was writing poems in high school. Well, I just can't answer that question, Laura. I would if I could, but a friend of mine gave me a poetry anthology, and that made a difference because it seemed to me that that poetry was a place that these poets who I was reading, they had some answers. They definitely had some strong opinions about what life was like and what it was about, and nobody I knew was expressing those kinds of sentiments, you know, and so I clung to it. I didn't come from a family with a lot of culture. I didn't come from any kind of particular religious background or ethnic background. And so poetry became my culture, and the poems that I read, I took inside myself, and they became sort of a bunch of family voices and a bunch of sort of touchstones in terms of certain situations, so that I could recognize the people who were around me, and I could recognize the feelings I was having in terms of the poems that I was reading. But I didn't have ambitions of being a poet. I just don't know why. That wouldn't have been. I was just sort of living and trying to do okay.
Are you surprised now to find yourself this important and
it's
influential
very
guy?
improbable. Yeah, no, I threaded the needle, and you know, I went through 100 car crashes, and yeah, it's extremely unlikely that I've gotten to write poems and I've gotten to be a part of the conversation and culture that poetry is. So I'm incredibly lucky. It's beyond, it's actually beyond comprehension. But getting back to the humor thing, I would say that the things you have to compensate for. So I was a runty little kid. I was a runty little boy who came to puberty late. You know, so I had to develop, you know, verbal abilities in some ways, and maybe some kinds of attention to human nature in order to hold my own in the ecosystem. And so I guess I did, and that becomes your lifeline, and if you're lucky, you get to, you know, turn it into something more.
Well, you could describe your poetry in terms of its sinew and muscularity, and its own kind of intellectual athleticism.
That's good. No, I think that's why I curse and posture so much in my poems, is because, you know, it's kind of macho acting out. Yeah.
Well, we're going to pick up on that again when we come back from break. Thank you very much.
Okay.
I'm Laura Mccullough. This is Brookdale's Visiting Writer Series. I'm talking with Tony Hoagland. Please come back after the break.
Does peace really have a chance within our lifetime? At Rotary, we believe it does. We've created programs at universities around the world dedicated solely to teaching peace to a new generation. There's a new symbol for peace. Rotary.
Brookdale's main campus is in Lincroft. We also have higher education centers located throughout Monmouth County. The Western Monmouth Branch campus in Freehold. The Eastern Monmouth Higher Education Center in Neptune. The Northern Monmouth Higher Education Center in Hazlitt. The Long Branch Higher Education Center. The Wall Higher Education Center and home of the New Jersey Coastal Communiversity. Higher education centers give you the flexibility you need to get your education.
Hi, this is Laura Mccullough. This is Brookdale's Visiting Writers Series, and I am in conversation with poet Tony Hoagland.
The other thing I wanted to say about humor in poems, Laura, is that if you can make people laugh, their muscles relax. And if their muscles relax, their immune system opens up, and you can actually penetrate them. You can actually get your poem, serious content, over the threshold because they're actually relaxed. They're not anxious about whether or not they understand a poem.
Well, one of your essays in Real Sophistication, which are wonderfully clear and playful and poetic essays, I might add. In one of them, you say, here it is, people cry from their heart, from their hearts, they joke from their heads.
Yeah.
And something in the confluence of those you're tapping into?
Well, that passage is about the way that we sort of connect various functions of the human psyche to different places in the body. I mean, we know that the heart is a metaphor, but we also, in some way, we think that the emotional center is, the somatic emotional center is somehow or other in the chest and maybe the throat. And we think that jokes come from the head. And I think they do, because jokes are a recognition of the way things are and sort of playing a trick on it or flipping things in some kind of way. So in a certain kind of way, jokes are a stepping back from circumstances. And in another way, it's a way of sort of connecting the parts. For example, black humor connects the good news to the bad news. The bad news is, for example, we don't know what we're doing and we're going to die. And we hurt other people's feelings all the time without intending to. You know, we're reckless, violent, vain. The good news is that we can see that and we can joke about it. So every joke is a good news, bad news joke in a way. It's sort of a looking down from.
Mm-hmm. The playfulness, the seriousness. Your poem Visitation, which a lot of our students are familiar with.
You have a lot of nerve teaching that poem.
Yeah, I can't speak about that poem here, but it's a great poem. People should read it out loud to their families at the dinner table. But you sell a very, very poignant elegiac subject matter by a lot of colloquial slang and drawing the reader closer before you delve into something that they might not otherwise have been willing to confront. The essay that you were talking about actually uses the analogy of chakras, energy centers within the body, and talks about image, diction, rhetoric as coming from different places. Where do you see yourself as speaking from? What body part, brain, heart?
Well, I think that I'm moving closer to the heart chakra, in fact, which I think that when you're a young man, which we were talking about earlier, that you have two very strong emotions: fear and rage. Or fear is behind almost many of your feelings and actions and stories. You know, you have to either dominate your environment or to at least sort of ward it off, by being spiky in some kind of way. And then rage is a sort of natural overflow when fear when fear boils up. So if you get to live long enough and you get to be friends with yourself, and in a certain kind of way, maybe in a larger way, be better friends with human nature. See that everybody embodies, everybody is a sort of seething, writhing set of masks and contention, and you get sympathy for that. Well, then that is sympathy, and you can move closer to the heart chakra.
Forgiveness of self and others and the conditions.
Yeah, that's right. Tolerance.
Speaking of tolerance, my students have noticed you have a lot of poems with a line about punching someone in the face.
Yeah, see, that's my early work. That's that's the punch-drunk, era. Yeah.
But there's also a lot of desire too. Another thing, not just young men, but certainly that the young feel. And so we've got the punching in the face. We've also got a lot of kisses in a lot of these poems.
You want poems to embody, all the urges. Not just the urge to be wise. But the urge, the sexual urges, the urge to connect, the urge to, the urge to dominate, to beg, to serve. You want a poem to sort of fold the whole human sensibility.
Well, all of that sounds very much from your head. Because it's not just humor that comes from the head, but the intellect and reasoning. If the new work, and I know you have a new book in the offing, is beginning to speak more from the heart, in what way is that softer, a different temperature, different subject matter, different lines? How are you using the page?
Well, maybe less compensated. Maybe feeling is less compensated for by wit. Maybe there's less apology for feeling, and there's more confidence. I guess also I think fear of boredom is a pretty strong motivator in the poetry of entertainment and wit. I certainly felt that I had better be entertaining if I were going to bother people for their time and their attention. And I didn't think that simply showing your wounds and saying feel sorry for me was going to be sufficient. That sounds a little bit like Billy Collins criticizing autobiographical poetry, but. So you don't want to bore people. You want to be intimate with people. American poetry is great because it is colloquial, because it is direct. And yes, I think that there are two shifts that I've made in my recent poems, which is one is that it's more concerned with the environment, with the America as a culture. And
well, can I pull on that?
Sure.
You certainly see in the early work, such as poem in Sweet Ruin, if you want to speak about America, let me speak about kissing my best friend's girlfriend, that sort of thing. And although there's still the personal in much of the recent work, there is this opening out to the political commentary on the culture. What are the themes that you're moving to? I mean, you were talking about a GPS system as an analogy for talking about a poem, but in terms of talking about your entire work, how is that center shifting for you?
Well, I think that in the early work, like most young people, I represented, myself as a person who had relationship to a family and who had, as somebody who was in pain and in confusion. So the self was the center. Whether I wanted it to be or not. And now there were a lot of poems about being a young man, about masculinity. That was another center, about being a representative young man and sort of suffering the slings and arrows of that. Now I think I see myself as a representative American who's, immersed neck deep in a culture which is seething and buzzing with overstimulation, in which the profound and the trivial are inextricably mingled constantly, so that Henry David Thoreau is used to sell a car, and all these pitches for spiritual enlightenment are connected with cosmetics. So I'm neck deep in the American milieu of being a consumer culture, a superpower, a powerless individual in whose government is responsible for things that you did not consent to, and yet somehow by your privilege you are complicit with. So all of that stuff.
Which is an awful lot. That's an awful lot for a poet to take on. And Hard Rain has a lot of that in there. It's a very, very searing book, and you don't turn your eye away from the hard questions. But I'm wondering, for our audience, if you would read an earlier poem, Honda Pavarotti, that locates one person in a very private but deeply American place as well.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And this poem, I think it unites a lot of things that I do in it. It's written about the experience of driving and listening to the radio at the same time. In this case, listening to classical radio and listening to an opera singer. It's not that I'm really conversant with opera. I'm not. But so the poem's called Honda Pavarotti, and I guess the title of the poem itself is this kind of hybrid. Honda Pavarotti. I'm driving on the dark highway when the opera singer on the radio opens his great mouth and the whole car plunges down the canyon of his throat. So the night becomes an aria of stars and exit signs as I steer through the galleries of one dilated Italian syllable after another. I love the passages in which the rich flood of the baritone strains out against the walls of the esophagus, and I love the pauses in which I hear the tenor's flesh labor to inhale enough oxygen to take the next plummet up into the chasm of the violins. In part of the song, it sounds as if the singer is being squeezed by an enormous pair of tongs while his head and legs keep kicking. In part of the song, it sounds as if he is standing in the middle of a coliseum, swinging a 300-pound lion by the tail. The empire of gravity conquered by the empire of aerodynamics, the citadel of pride in flames, and the citizens of weakness celebrating their defeat in chorus. Joy and suffering made one at last, joined in everything a marriage is alleged to be. Though I know the woman he is singing for is dead in a foreign language on the stage beside him, though I know his chain mail is made of silver-painted plastic, and his mismanagement of money is legendary. As I know, I have squandered most of my own life in a haze of trivial distractions, and that I will continue to waste it. But wherever I was going, I don't care anymore, because no place I could arrive at is good enough for this thing made out of experience, but to which experience will never measure up. And that dark and soaring fact is enough to make me renounce the whole world or fall in love with it forever.
Thank you very much, Tony.
So,
and we are out of time.
We're out of time.
Thank you so much for that poem. Thank you for talking with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you for being here in our little community.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is Tony Hoagland. I'm Laura Mccullough. This is Brookdale's Visiting Writers Series.